Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name is Eric Swanson and I'm the Section Manager for the Federal Billing and Projects Unit within the Bureau of State Accounting Operations. We hope you find this training informative. Let's jump right in. In fiscal year 2019-20, federal funds accounted for roughly $65 billion, which is approximately 1/3 of all state receipts. Our section here within the Bureau drew down approximately $55 billion on behalf of state agencies. One of the goals we often talk about in our section is to ultimately manage all federal draws for the state. We hope from this presentation we can give you a brief glimpse of what we do and what we can help you with. This is the basic federal grant life cycle. You first would apply for a grant with the federal government. Next, if you're lucky enough, you'll be awarded the grant. You then need all the necessary records established within SFS, which we will discuss later on. Once you have all the appropriate records established, you can start spending. Once spent, it hits our draw worksheet the next day. We then go into each draw system and request the funds related to the charges from the previous day. On the third day after expended in SFS, New York State receives the federal funds. Finally, as with all federal grants, there is monitoring, reports, increases to the grants, decreases to the grants, overspending, many report requirements, and closeouts. I'm now going to pass the baton over to Rudy Kashup, who will talk about establishing a federal grant in SFS, as well as a new change regarding our disaster reporting.
Currently, OSC is in charge of setting up the new grant awards in SFS for non-onboarding agencies. We set up approximately 500 grant awards a year. In addition, we set up over 100 grant awards related to COVID in 2020. At this time, all the agencies are considered non-onboarding agencies. Department of Labor is currently the only onboarding agency to ESA. Onboarding agency sets up its own contract, project costing, and award profile module in SFS. OSC reviews the information entered in these modules and activates the contract. Non-onboarding agency receives the grant award from the federal government. Agency then submits the AC3286S form, also known as Grant Setup Form, to OSC along with the grant documents to the federal grant mailbox. OSC establishes the contract, project costing, award profile modules in SFS. The key data elements entail federal grant amount, start, end, liquidation dates, CFDA number, activity ID, activity name or description, and federal agency. The AC3286S form is located under the GFO found on New York State Controller's website. We updated the AC form and the instructions tab to include the disasters, and we would like to go over those items with you today. This update helps us in identifying and tracking federal grants related to disasters effectively. The first updated row is disaster related. You will use this row to list any disasters such as COVID-19. This is the rest of the form. We put it on another slide so that you can see it better. Activity ID, disaster related. You will mark X in this row to identify whether or not the activity ID is disaster related. For example, COVID-related grants must start with COVID. This helps us track items within queries by smart coding the activity ID. Disaster related. If yes, enter the amount of the grant related to the disaster. If not, 100%. This row should be used for grants only related to disasters. You would put the dollar amount related to a disaster if not 100%. Additional comments. This row is used for any comments related to the grant. Also, state any public law reference if disaster related. The dollar amount and public law reference is needed for New York State's tracking purposes. All this information is included in the Instructions tab of the AC form for your reference. This is the AC 3286S Instructions tab and is helpful in completing the AC form. The yellow highlighted rows have the information related to the new additions on the AC form. OSC also sets up pre-awards for the agencies waiting to receive the grant award from the federal government, which allows spending for a specific grant. This option is strictly utilized for awards received annually and ongoing basis. Pre-awards are mainly utilized for FPIC allocation process and are the only costs that will be reimbursed by the federal government. Agency initially completes the pre-award tab on the AC 3286S and sends it to OSC via email. OSC then creates the project ID so the agencies can spend and track the money before the grant award is received from the federal government. Once the grant award is received by the agency, OSC then links the project to the contract and creates an award profile in SFS. If the grant award is not received by the state fiscal year end, all charges must be moved immediately. The CARES Act, also known as the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, was passed by Congress and signed into law by President Trump on March 27, 2020. The Division of Budget has issued the revised Budget Bulletin 80501 and is found on SFS under SFS Notices. The link is also mentioned in the slide. You can review this Budget Bulletin for guidance on how to charge special emergency preparedness and response expenditures for the COVID-19 response effort. Agencies currently utilizing project and activity chart fields for federal reimbursement purposes should continue this practice. If any disaster-related expenses, chart field 1, 2, or 3 must be used in addition to the federal project and activity ID chart fields for tracking purposes. Budgets and control. There has to be approps and segregation. The grant needs to be set up in SFS, and then the agency sets up the project child budget, which automatically generates the parent budget. Budget chart fields are required when setting up a project child budget. They are PC Business Unit, Account, Fund, Department, Program, Budget Reference, Project, and Activity ID. In order to begin spending, appropriation and child budget needs to be established in SFS. I will now pass it on to my coworker Dom Curcio, who will go over the federal draw systems, grant closeouts, and agency improvement opportunities.
For grants that are drawn by OSC, SFS provides a draw worksheet page to display all the funds that have accumulated per award based on various draw attributes. Benefits of OSC performing the drawdown process include streamlining the process and the opportunity to reconcile. Once a transaction has a payment date, OSC performs the draw after the payment goes through the SFS billing process. Funds are typically received within 1 to 3 business days. Daily reconciliations are performed to confirm that New York State General Checking receives the funds that they are expected to receive and to make sure that all deposits are correctly posted. If BSAO reaches out to an agency to clear any reconciling issues, they need to be taken care of immediately or risk the potential loss of federal funds. ASAP, PMS, and G5 are the federal draw system that OSC currently uses. U.S. Department of Justice is transitioning agencies to start using ASAP. If this pertains to your agency and you are performing your own draw, please reach out to us. OSC will take over this process and assist with any draw issues that arise. Here we will discuss liquidation period. OSC will lose the ability to draw down federal funds when the liquidation period ends. It is vital for these dates to be monitored, as an expired date can prevent agency funds from being federally reimbursed for obligations that incurred during the budget period. Liquidation dates are subject to be extended by the feds. Therefore, agencies must submit a revised AC 3286S form to OSC, as well as new grant documentation showing that the grant has been extended to have the date amended. Agencies must monitor the liquidation date that pertains to their federal system, and transactions should be submitted by that date. For each grant, the NYGR 0010 contains budget and financial information for grant awards for all BUs. This report breaks down encumbrances, expenditures, and disbursements by reference award number and project ID. This is where you can find the liquidation date mentioned earlier. This report is a good tool to help monitor if agencies have exceeded the grant authority. NYGR 1557 also includes budget and financial information for grant awards. This report breaks down budgets, encumbrances, and expenditures and provides the current balance of the amount of the grant award that has not been spent. On a quarterly basis, OSC certifies only the 425s for those PANs or payee account numbers for which OSC draws on. The reporting of the remaining PANs are the responsibility of the receiving agencies. To comply with the federal financial report requirements, most PMS projects require recipients to file the federal 425 report every quarter to reconcile cash receipts and disbursements between the federal government and the state agency. If there are any issues with quarterly reporting, agencies can reach out to OSC. Agencies should make sure authority is spent down and appropriately charged. Ensure that what is in SFS matches what is reported on the final report and the amount drawn down from the feds. If you do not have access to the federal system, we can establish access for you. Please contact us at the email address that is shown on screen. For grant awards that OSC draws, let us know if you see any discrepancies prior to closeout. It is important to be proactive. Spending, billing amounts, and end dates should be monitored. If there are any changes to the grant award, an AC 3286S form should be submitted to OSC. Federal funds must be spent in a timely fashion. Always notify OSC of any potential issues. For journal vouchers, it is important to code correctly. Remember, GLE pertains to expenditures, while GLR pertains to revenue. Here are more agency improvement opportunities. Remember to spend timely. Older year grants should be spent on first to ensure no loss of funding. For more information, you may refer to the GFO Chapter 9. Here is the GFO website address and some other key references you should be aware of. Now I will pass it back over to Eric to discuss a current project that we are involved in.
To wrap up our training today, we just wanted to bring your attention to a current statewide effort between SFS, DOB, and OSC called the Project Costing Improvement Project, or PCIP. The goals are to improve and standardize the use of the project ID in SFS, and to gain improved project financial information from the system. So why is this a big change for federal grant awards? Well, currently SFS primarily uses the project ID chart field to collect just federal grant data. The project costing module in SFS, though, has the capability to collect and report related transaction details from multiple funding sources to support project financial management. This enables agencies to use project ID to support the agency project without defining the project ID as the federal grant, and also report costs at the project ID, activity ID, and federal grant level. Through this added capability in SFS, the state will gain improved capital project information to support the state's capital program and the bond reimbursement process. Additionally, with the implementation of this project, agencies will gain the benefit of increased accuracy and improved efficiency from agency project financial management, and the state will gain increased consistency in the use of the project ID and the capture of project financial information. Here is our contact information. For questions related to the establishment and maintenance of projects, you can send your emails to federalgrants@osc.newyork.gov. For questions related to the draw and billing, you can send your emails to federalbilling@osc.newyork.gov. We'd like to thank everyone for attending today. We will now take some time to answer any questions you may have. If for some reason we do not get to your question, please feel free to reach out to us using one of the email addresses mentioned in the previous slide. Thanks again, everyone. I guess we open up now if anyone has any questions regarding any of the slides, any of the information that was presented. Question? Am I understanding this correctly? The project improvement project will allow us to track both the grant award and the associated state match.
I can field that, Eric. This is Melody. Yes, your understanding is correct. Under the PCIP project, there will be a change in the potential to have the change in the one-to-one relationship between the grant and the project ID, where you would have a project ID that could then be used in a funding source, a federal fund, for instance, and a state funding source. So you could track that project in both places. The project on the federal side would be associated with the grant that you're familiar with today, and you would get all of your grant information from the grants module regarding that grant. And then your project would have both your funding sources or all of your multiple funding sources if it's funded from multiple places, a federal fund, multiple state funds, for instance.
Thank you, Melody.
Sure.
Okay, when and where can I get more information regarding the PCIP? Melody, did you want to answer that one?
Sure. Yeah, we don't have information on it now. We've just kind of finished the business requirements with the representative agencies regarding projects, and we are working on now the conceptual design of how it's going to work and some of the conceptual policies that we'll have in place that will govern them. So once we get a little further down the pike with the project, we'll have more information to share. And definitely you should see some things in like the GFO updates when we update the GFO for that kind of thing. And then there'll probably be even more communication once we get to a point before implementation plans to make sure that all the agencies know what the project is and how it impacts what you do at your agency.
Ursula, if we have questions about the CARES Act and project spending, who should we ask at OSC? I guess it would depend on the question, but you can start with our projects unit. Charlene Caputi is the head of our projects unit. So you can start there and we can help you. If we're not the appropriate person to answer your question, we can help you find out who is. From Amy, if the federal grant period ends on September 30th and the final FFR 425 needs to be submitted by the end of December, we should report the expenditures through 9/30 on the form, correct? Any payments we have made through 9/30 would have been drawn down, correct? I'll pass that over to Karen.
Yes, they should have been drawn down. What I would do is just verify it and run the reports from SFS as well as check in TMS to make sure that they match. If they don't, we can reach out to the billing unit. And you would be reporting any expenditures through the 30th, September 30th. That's if OSC draws your grants
Right.
to reach out to us.
Okay, thank you. Amy, if you have any additional questions regarding that, just reach out to us. We got, often state agencies learn of federal grant awards much later than the award date. What is the timeline for completing the AC32S and submitting it to OSC? Charlene, did you want to respond to that one?
Sure. If the award is delayed, you would have to wait until the grant award comes in to set it up so that we make sure it's on the federal system so that it's a grant withdrawal. So as soon as, you find out, then we can set it up. Otherwise, we have to wait.
Right, and it also goes back to where Ruby mentioned about the pre-awards. So,
Oh, yeah, right. Yep, pre-award.
if it's a reoccurring grant, you can submit the pre-award from the ASC 32S to get those set up. But yeah, we do often see that the grants will come in later than the award date. Regarding the pre-awards follow-up, would you be so kind to expand on the idea that charges would have to be moved if an award was not received? Do you mean removed or moved to another expenditure account? It would be moved to another federal grant, I would assume. But for most cases with these pre-awards, this is why we made the exception, is that they're almost guaranteed to come in every single year. Is why we have the exception for those. We're not going to put up random awards without having one from the previous year or years.
This is Melody Guest, and I'd like to just add a little bit about the 425 and the closing out of a grant, or just putting the last expenditures in with the federal government. Agency, we've seen over the years that agencies have done a really good job with this, but obviously it does cause a problem for you guys when you have to file your final reports if the expenditures and the revenues don't match. And Karen mentioned, reaching out to the billing, especially if OSC is drawing those funds for you. But the thing to really keep in mind is that since that grant closes on 9/30, payroll can sometimes be an issue. And that's something you'd want to speak with Eric and his team about. But all your other payments should really be in the system 2 days prior to the last day of the quarter, so that you're guaranteed to have that payment out and we can draw the funds in time. You really want the revenue drawn in that same September period before you close out that grant. So you can manage your payments to make sure they're paid sooner than 9/30. Anything you pay on 9/30 is going to be problematic as far as drawing funds in October.
This is Karen Kellogg. Just to add to what Melody just said, as far as the payroll goes, your FDIC charges also have to be cleared prior to the awards lapsing.
Looks like we have another question that came in. Thank you. Trying to distinguish between understanding chart field coding for procurement services contracts versus grant contracts. If there is an activity ID in the chart fields for entry into SFS, does that mean that the award is a grant?
This is Dave. I think it's a good indicator if the activity ID is used that it is a grant, because activity is a field that all grants need to have, but I'm not sure it precludes that it isn't necessarily. So I think there could be other chart strings, like say general fund or state or special revenue funds that also use that, even though it's not a requirement for those funds.
Okay. Again, it's difficult to not get a back and forth from the person asking the questions. So if we did not answer your question or you need some more clarification, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you everyone for taking the time to listen to us today, and we hope everyone is doing well, happy and healthy. Thank you.